Hello friends, in the series which we are doing on understanding popular culture, today we will talk about popular culture, that how popular culture is a significant kind of a aspect in the common life of the people. And when we talk about popular culture, we also talk about the high culture. That is another kind of a culture which is related to the elites of the society. So this kind of a distinction between the high culture and the low culture, popular culture and the elite culture, these kinds of things, they are there. And when we talk about the various kinds of thinkers, those who have talked about culture per se, that how culture is to be defined, then we see that Raymond Williams, he has talked about culture in the framework of the way of life. And some other thinkers like Malinowski, Karl Marx, they also have talked about the cultural aspects. And in the context of culture, we can also see that various kinds of cultures, they could be seen in the society, beginning from the courtly culture, from the different kinds of rulers, those who were there, and the kind of culture which was exhibited in their courts. From there, we can also see that how TV culture and film culture, mall culture, so all these kinds of cultures which are there, they could be seen in the society. So in the framework of the references, you can see that the source material of SOL, or the School of Open Learning, University of Delhi, on the cultures in Indian subcontinent, then BP Sinha, India's culture, the state, the art and beyond, Boris Rasov and Yugendra Singh, the sociology of culture, John Story, cultural theory and popular culture, Pramod K. Nair, an introduction to cultural studies, Peter Burke, popular culture in early modern Europe. So these are some of the readings which one can refer when one is talking about culture and the popular culture. In the course of our discussion, we'll try to explain what culture is, how popular culture and elite culture, they are different from each other, the kind of positions which have been taken by some of the thinkers in the context of cultures, that how cultures of the elite, how it is different from the cultures of the common masses or the popular culture. So in that context, we can argue that culture is not a part of nature, but it is something acquired. Over a period of time, we acquire culture. It is also not an individual acquisition, but handed down from past as part of a tradition. And in this sense, if we try to understand it, then culture gets defined as a tradition of values of self-realization, and values are objects of evaluating a fundamental human activity. So we find that culture, basically, they are being handed down from one generation to another. We tend to understand culture from our ancestors, and also culture is dynamic in nature. It is not static. Over a period of time, there are changes in culture, and one generation may have some kind of a varied kind of cultural practices which have been handed down to them from their ancestors. So this dynamism of culture is also very, very relevant in this context. We also see that when we talk about value and valuing, then it implies seeking, choosing and approving. So at the level of human mind, seeking becomes self-conscious and critical, and its objects as well as process of seeking becomes symbolized. So when you talk about the value system and the way we value things, we find that these kinds of aspects, they are very, very relevant. And we also see that how expression and communication of valued experiences, they provide a socio-historical actuality to ideal process, and cultural world is created as historical tradition of human endeavor for the self-realization. And in this context, we see that how culture, which has been used from earlier times, and over a period of time, the way the term culture got changed. And in the initial period, when we tend to understand it, then it was associated with the cultivation of animals and crops, and with the religious worship. Hence the word cult has been associated with it. But over a period of time, we find that a lot of changes which came, especially in the 16th to 19th centuries, and how over a period of time it was implied to the improvement of the human mind and the personal manners through learning. So we find that during this period the term came to mean improvement of society as a whole and a synonym for civilization. So culture as opposite of barbarism. And with the rise of romanticism, we find that the term designated spiritual development in contrast to material and infrastructural change. So we find that over a period of time various kinds of changes they came in the definition as well as the usage of the term culture, and how it was in a way positioned in the framework of civilization as culture as opposite of barbarism. When we argue that these people are cultured, then we also refer that these people are in a way also civilized. So culture and civilization, they go hand in hand. We also see that over a period of time in different countries of the world, especially Europe, and how folk culture and national culture, these kinds of things, they also emerged, because the folk culture relates to the people, and the national culture may relate to the entire nation or the entire community of the people. So these kinds of ideas, they were also there in the 19th century, and the German concept of Kultur broadly equated culture with civilization and with individual or collective moral progress. So we find that how culture basically is always linked with civilization, and the idea of collective or individual moral progress is also being attached to culture. And we find that how the anthropologists, they in a way contributed a lot in terms of development of these aspects. And we find that culture is to be found everywhere. We just cannot see it in only the high arts or for the elites. The culture of the common masses is also an important aspect which has to be studied. And in the recent cultural studies, there is a lot of focus in terms of understanding or in terms of undertaking research or in the context of the culture of the common masses. And many a times we see that the idea of popular culture, because the popular culture relates to the majority of people. And in this context, we find that some of the thinkers like Raymond Williams, in his work Keywords, he sums up the historical shifts into three current usages. First one is to refer to the intellectual, spiritual and the aesthetic development of an individual, group or society. Second one is to capture a range of intellectual and the artistic activities and their products, whether they relate to art, they relate to theatre or film. So in this kind of a usage, culture is more or less synonymous with arts. Thirdly, to designate the entire way of life, activities, beliefs and customs of a people, group or society. So we find that the way Raymond Williams has tried to define or in a way talk about these aspects, they are quite comprehensive in nature. And when you talk about the entire way of life and the activities, then we think then we are able to realize that this aspect is quite comprehensive in nature. It is taking into totality or taking into context all what man is thinking about, or all what man is in a way eating, drinking, and it also applies to both the genders in that context, in the context of the human beings. And then we also see that the kind of transformations which have emerged over a period of time in a way in the way the culture is being understood. And we find that the way we have to understand it is something distinctive from and more abstract to the material, technological and the social structural realities. And we also have to understand it as a patterned sphere of beliefs, values, symbols, signs and discourses. So we find that when we apply these kinds of ideas, then certain autonomy of culture is to be accepted, and culture should not be perceived as a mere reflection of underlying economic forces, distribution of power or social structural needs. And it also is not to be restricted in the context of arts, but also in a way to be understood to pervade all aspects and levels of the social life. And in this context, we find that various thinkers and the scholars and academicians, they also have contributed to the development in the context of the ideas relating to culture. And one of them is Durkheim, and he was one of the founding fathers of the modern sociology, and he's also being credited for developing insightful theories which are related to structures of society, relationship between the individual and the society, and the development of societies from simple to complex. So we find that thinkers like Durkheim, they have in a way given insightful theories. Their theories are in a way visionary in nature in that sense, and how the structures of society, they are to be understood, what is the relationship between the individual and the society, that has also to be examined, and how societies, they develop from being simple to the complex. So all these kinds of ideas, they could be seen in the theories which have been provided by Durkheim. And he was also one to apply the scientific approaches to the social phenomena, and he says that the individual actions, they were generally influenced by the different aspects of the social structure. And he also talks about the culture and its many relationships to society. And when he talks about the culture, his ideas, they can be summed up as follows. For example, the cultural bonds which are individual to wider group through the socialization process. Secondly, culture helps potentially disruptive individuals at bay. Thirdly, individual identity must be replaced by collective group identity for society to work in a state of consensus. And he also talks about the collective identity and culture are necessary for social order to be established and maintained. Apart from him, there are other thinkers, there are other people, those who are in academics, those who are in a realm of philosophy, and one of them is Karl Marx, who has talked about culture in industrial society and how it operates as a dominant ideology, and how he connected culture to power and the economic life in systematic ways. So in that context, culture or ruling ideas and values is produced by a ruling group in order to justify its dominance over others. So what Marx is talking about, that the way culture is being produced, the way it is being used so as to dominate others. And he also says that how culture acts as a constraint on the individual, leading to social order and control. So in a way, the individuals, they must realize their true class identity in order to break free from the ruling class oppression. And the idea of the class consciousness and the identity, they lead to revolutionary social change and to creation of new social type and a new social culture. So this idea of class consciousness and the conflict of the classes, which was central to the ideas of Marx, they could also be applied they have also been applied in the context of culture as well. And he says that this class consciousness, or being aware about the kind of class in which one person is there, and the question of identity, again they lead to some kind of a change which is very revolutionary in nature. And this is how we find that the new social groups, they are being created, and a new social structure also emerges. And apart from Marx and Durkheim, we also find Max Weber was another important thinker, and his cultural theory is based on understanding of human actions, and he is also famous for his ideas combining economic sociology and sociology of religion. So we find that Max Weber's ideas, they are also very comprehensive in nature, how they are able to combine the economic sociology and the sociology of religion as well. And he also in a way said, he argued against the materialistic view of the origins of capitalism, and he emphasized that the religious beliefs, including the different cultural practices, also played important role in the rise of capitalism. And we find that how when we tend to understand culture, many a times we find that the kind of evolution which is happening in the context of society is haphazard in nature, and it is also accidental. And when human action and the interaction that takes place, that causes the social change and the societal evolution as well. And when both of them, this kind of an interaction is taking place, we cannot predict the outcome of this interaction in advance. And he also says that how the cultural ideas and the values, they are independent of the economy and of how production is also organized. So these thinkers, they have tried to communicate their ideas relating to culture, and how scholars like Pierre Bourdieu, he talks about the three kinds of capital which determine the social power and the social inequality. And as you can see on the screen as well, how the economic capital describes the financial resources, and the social capital is concerned about the social ties that people can mobilize for their own advantage. So scholars, they have tried to see that how this idea of a cultural capital is a concept that has various kinds of dimensions. Especially Bourdieu talks about it, and he tries to convey that the objective knowledge of arts and culture, and the cultural tastes and preferences, the kind of formal qualifications, cultural skills and the know-how, and the ability to be discriminating and to make distinctions between good and bad. So these could be seen as those kinds of aspects which have to be taken into account while one is talking about culture. And other scholars like Ferdinand de Saussure, who was a French linguist, he laid the foundations of structuralist approach to language as well as culture. And according to him, the language consisted of an acoustic image, words, sounds, and which was linked to concepts, which were the thoughts or ideas. So we find that various thinkers and scholars, they have devoted a lot of time, and how they have even the linguists, they have tried to associate their own ideas relating to the language in the context of culture, and their ideas relating to language, when they have tried to differentiate the language from the speech, and they have also been in a way applied to the culture as well. And other thinkers like Claude Lévi-Strauss, who regarded as leading structuralist theorist of culture, and his major strength of his approach was his ability to map autonomy of culture, and how he showed that the cultural systems, they had their own rules and logic of operation. So he in a way was one of the main persons who was talking about the structuralist theory of culture, and how he was in a way able to map the autonomy of culture, and for that how he has been acknowledged among his peers and the people, those who have been involved in the study of culture. And he talks about the autonomy of culture in the sense that how cultural systems, they had their own rules and they had their own logic. And we also find that he had also been criticized on certain grounds, that how ideas of power, they are curiously absent from his work. And he has also been criticized on the ground that there is no understanding of the ways that mythologies might become institutionalized because they support certain interest. There is further criticism of Lévi-Strauss as he sees culture as an abstraction that is able to exist without active human intervention. So the agency part has been seemed to have been denied with culture, and which is operating in a deterministic way. So these are some of the criticisms of Lévi-Strauss, and the people, those who have criticized them, they have tried to see the important role of agency in the way the culture operates. Some of the other thinkers like Roland Barthes was another pioneer of the structuralist approach to culture in 1950s, and he argued for a close convergence between the linguistics and the cultural inquiry, and heralded a movement towards the post-structuralism. and Barthes applied semiotics to food system, rituals, etc. So semiotics is the study or the study of the sign language, that way study of the signs, and how Barthes in a way applied semiotics or the system of signs to the food system and the rituals, and how the food systems and the ritual, both of them, they are also very important components of culture. They are integral to the ideas which are relating to culture. And he also communicated that how signs within culture are never innocent, but rather they are caught up in complex web of ideological reproduction. So how signs, they are very, very important, and how they are very culture specific, and one sign in a particular culture may be interpreted in a different manner than the other sign. So this semiotics or the study of signs was very, very important in this context. And we also find that the key aspect of mythologies was the use of distinction between denotation and the connotation, where we find that the denotation referred to the literal meaning and the connotation to extra meanings, mythologicals, that are layered on top. So Barthes combined semiotics with the critical theory, and this legitimized study of popular culture in intellectual circles. So in this context, we see that the way Barthes talked about and how he showed that even the junk culture activities like the wrestling or the mundane objects like the automobile, they were fair game for the analysis from the academic point of view. And by 1970s, his ideas, they influenced the British cultural studies on advertising, news programming, as well as the print media. We also find that other thinkers like Foucault, how he talks about culture, and in large part he was responsible for constructing and institutionalizing post-structural model. And he says that discourse is perhaps the central motive in Foucault's thinking, and the discourse can be thought of as a way of describing, defining, classifying, and thinking about people, things, and even knowledge and abstract systems of thought. So discourses were never free of power relations, and how these discourses, they came out of the power / knowledge relationships between groups of people, and how power was a fundamental and inescapable dimension of the social life. So we find that these thinkers, they talked about culture from different angles and ideas, and Foucault, he in a way introduced the number of key ideas like the microphysics of power, capillary nature of power, fragmentary and incomplete nature of power, constructive nature of power, and concept of governmentality. So all these ideas, they were being talked about, and how he in a way sought to develop a history of hidden and silent in the historical studies to understand those who are on forgotten, silent and powerless side of these differences. So we find that his method is useful in creating cultural identities, and we also find that how 20th century witnessed a lot of research on the production and reception of culture in mass media, mass communication, film, television studies, and sociology. And this kind of an approach which reflects the contemporary inquiry. So we find that when you apply these kinds of ideas in different fields of study, so these fields of study, they also get enriched in that sense, and this kind of an approach also reflects the contemporary inquiry as well. So despite there is a lot of pluralism in the theoretical paradigms, some common principles can also be identified in this kind of a perspective. And we also find that when you accept the broad kind of comprehensive kind of definitions of culture, some of the tangible products such as art, a book or a film or a broadcast could also be studied. For example, the recorded culture or the cassette culture, cultural products, cultural object, etc. So this is what we had to discuss in this part of the lecture. We will further talk about the popular culture and some more ideas which are concerned with the popular culture in our next lecture, which will also deal with the popular culture. So thank you very much.